William Gibson once said, "The future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed." The time has come to draw attention to science fiction stories written all over the planet. Stories made of different languages, colors, shapes, hopes, and beliefs. The future happens everywhere. That's why we are here.
Hello, everyone. So, all the panelists will start to show up, and we are all of us. So, welcome, everyone. Welcome to the audience. Welcome to this second panel of the second day of FutureCon 2021. And thank you for being here. Gotta say thanks also to all the organization team, both of FutureCon and also to the Chilean Science Fiction Association that's been helping with all of the technical support and all the transmission and all of that. So thanks to the whole team. And right now, so we are gathered here with great writers, great people as well, to talk about this posthumous posthumanity. That's the name of our topic today. What's beyond the human species, augmentation, hybridization, and externalization, new identities arising in contemporary science fiction. So, big topic, I think. So the first thing I'm gonna do is to give you an introduction about all the people that with us right now, and I'm gonna start with Aliette. Hello.
Hi.
So Aliette de Bodard. You are, well, I'm going to read your bio. Aliette de Bodard writes speculative fiction. She has won 3 Nebula Awards, a Locus Award, a European Science Fiction Society Award, a British Fantasy Award, 4 BASFA Awards, and was a double Hugo finalist. And she lives in Paris, France. Welcome, Aliette. We're glad to have you here. All right, just if you want to say hi, man.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Hi, everyone.
Good. Okay, so Victor, I'm going with you right now. Victor Fernando R. Ocampo. Victor Ocampo is the author of the International Ribery Book Award shortlisted The Infinite Library and Other Stories, and Here Be Dragon, which won the Romeo Forbes Children's Story Award in 2012. His play-by-email interactive fiction piece, The Book of Red Shadows, debuted at the Singapore Writers' Festival in 2020. His writing has appeared in many publications, including Apex Magazine, Daily Science Fiction, Lican Journal, Strange Horizons, Philippines Graphic, Science Fiction World, and the Quarterly Literature Review of Singapore, as well as anthologies like The Best New Singapore Short Stories, Fish Eats Lion, New Singaporean Speculative Fiction, Lontar, the Journal of Southeast Asian Speculative Fiction, Maxim Volume, Best New Philippine Fiction, and the Philippine Speculative Fiction Series. He is a fellow at the Milford Science Fiction Writers Conference, UK, and the Cinemalaya Ricky Lee Film Script Writing Workshop, as well as a Jalan Besar Writer-in-Resident at Singling Station. Welcome, Victor, and please correct me if I pronounce anything of all those names wrong, but welcome.
Hi, everyone. Mabuhay from Singapore.
It's great to have you here. Now, Daniela L. Guzman. Born in Guadalajara, Mexico, Daniela L. Guzman is a writer, translator, and part-time elf at medieval festivals. She attended Clarion West in 2021 and is the author of the short story books Un Tlacuache salvó este libro del fuego, Odo Ediciones, and Noche de Pizza con mi villano. Welcome, Daniela. Great to have you here as well.
Hi, everyone.
Now, Chen Chifan, aka Stanley Chan, he's a Chinese speculative fiction author, translator, and curator. His major works include Waste Tide, Locus Best New Novel finalist, as well as short story collections Future Diseases and Algorithms for Life, which have won him 3 Chinese Galaxy Awards and 15 Chinese Nebula Awards. Based in Shanghai, Chen Chifan is currently working on a new book entitled AI 2041 with Dr. Kai-Fu Lee, forthcoming in 2021 with Crown at Penguin Random House. Yes, exactly that one. Welcome. How are you doing, Sam?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here.
It's great to have you here. And lastly, we have Renan Bernardo. Renan is a science fiction and fantasy writer from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. He writes in Portuguese and English. He's published in English, Portuguese, Italian, and soon in Chinese. His fiction appeared or is forthcoming at Dark Matter magazine, Three Crows magazine, Simultaneous Times podcast, and Live Beyond as anthology. His short story, A Norma Aqui de Cima, was a finalist for 2020 Odisseia Award and 2020 Argos Award through Brazilian SFF Awards. In 2021, he published O Rio que Passou em Minha Vida, a climate fiction novelette set in Rio de Janeiro. He is also a computer engineer and works in a project that one day might cast Earth in a black hole. That's the introduction of Renan. Welcome, Renan.
Hello. Hello,
I do my
everyone.
best in Portuguese. Hope that the black hole situation is moving. It's not problematic right now.
Yeah.
Well, so once again, thank you all of you for being here. So the topic that we're gonna discuss today, as we mentioned initially in the title of this, posthumanism. First, I just wanted to make up just a brief introduction of the basic concepts that we're gonna be dealing with before starting with our first questions. So first of all, we understand as a general term that transhumanism deals with the enhancement of the human being, but posthumanism is more like it's more like a state of existing beyond being human, right? So it's like a kind of a next step, sort of. So in terms of that, the first question, and I'm gonna let you talk more about yourself as well if you want, but to start this conversation, the question is, are we already posthumans? Where do we stand in these new proposed modalities of existence, of what we understand of being human? So I'm gonna start with Aliette, just to keep the same order that I started with. What do you think, Aliette, about this?
I think it really depends on, there's going to be a question of what you define to be human, right? And what
Exactly.
what you consider, like, at least to me, that would involve some sort of being post-human would involve some sort of technological upgrades to physical or mental, and we already have some of these with us, right? And we also, while we may not be, existing full time in virtual spaces, we actually occupy a lot of them. Prior to this call, I was chatting with 2 friends on WhatsApp. We're all, on social media and in several Slacks and several places like these, which are essentially virtual hangouts, right? So while this may not look like what, the mental image in the movie of like us leaving our human bodies and experiences behind, to some extent, we're no longer occupying the same spaces of existence that we were occupying, say, 300 or 400 years ago. And this is going to continue changing and evolving and shifting as time goes by, right? So I think, at least, if you ask me to put down a personal definition, I think we're already on our way to something different.
We're on our way. Yeah, absolutely. Something at least it's happening. Victor, what do you think about it?
I agree with Aliette. We are on our way somewhere, that's for sure. For me, the term posthumanism is actually a philosophical term. It is it comes from actually derived from the term for humanism, which is basically the main philosophical treatise for the Enlightenment. And essentially, at its core, it's what does it mean to be human? And unfortunately for us, this is something that is ever changing. So what we define as human at one point may not be exactly how somebody else would define it, maybe 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 years from now. But one thing is for sure, as writers, it is part of our task to actually imagine what comes after what we have right now. And being all writers here, I suppose one of the more interesting aspects of posthumanism is literally that. How can we write something of which is outside our sphere of existence? Even right now, just having the internet, I mean, we all remember, at least most of us. I'm not sure about the younger ones in the audience if they remember actually not having the internet here. But does that make us? Yeah, does that make us post-human now that we have the world's information at our fingertips? It's for us. It's part of our being part of being human. But for our parents, it might be something else entirely different. So what is important here for us being writers is imagining the next step. What does this mean? Does it mean a technological leap? Does it mean that we cannot exist anymore without that? The only other thing I want to put here is that the nice thing about having a panel from every part of the world is we bring our own culture with us when we talk about this issue. Because if you look at what is in science fiction that is out there currently, the vast majority of what is defined as what comes after humanity comes from a very Western perspective. The fact that we mention technology at all right now is actually a very West-centric looking way of looking at things. It's just one of the possibilities of posthumanism that is there. Aliens could come and turn us into something else, for example. And that may or may not be technology related in that regard. But all I'm saying is it is a much broader category than what we have. And I guess part of our job as being writers outside of the centers of science fiction is that we need to bring what does being post-human mean for us to the table. That's it. Sorry if I had a meandering answer.
No, that was a great kiss. You got me thinking about this concept of, like, in philosophy, as you mentioned, philosophy, like the Lacan concept of the object of desire as post-humanism, as something perhaps not. I mean, like, as we move forward, also the concept moves forward. No, something like that. Because I remember the times where we didn't have internet. So, are we always like moving the post-human concept further away? Yeah, could be. Daniela, what do you think?
Well, I think this question of whether we are already posthuman or not is interesting because to start, like Victor was saying, like the concept of what being human is or implies, it's constantly changing. And if we think about it, it was not really long ago when some marginalized communities, people of color, women, disabled people weren't exactly considered inside the category of being human. And I think this struggles to define ourselves as human when we belong to some sort of marginalized or oppressed group is still ongoing. So it's kind of probably like William Gibson was saying, that the future is here, but it is not evenly distributed. It's really curious to be in the search or in the process of becoming posthuman at the same time, where some communities are still fighting for the right to be defined as human and to be treated as properly human. So that's one thing. The other thing is that, like Aliette was saying, I think it's a fact that we already have some sort of technological augmentations. Like if you think about it, in the past, if you were in the streets, you could totally get lost and you had to rely completely on your sense of orientation, which, for example, for me is really poor. And now I can consider myself a person which is augmented. My sense of orientation is augmented by having Google Maps and being able to to navigate the places and the cities in ways that were not possible in the past. And it's also true that we are here sharing this space from totally different places in the world, and we are simultaneously in a physical space in Singapore, in Brazil, in Mexico, and at the same time we are in this virtual space. We coexist with our virtual avatars. We are in social networks. We kind of have like this multiplicity of identities of the digital world, and especially with the pandemics, I think this has been enhanced. We have experienced a lot of telepresence due to the pandemics, but also I think precisely this process of the pandemics probably talks to us about the fact that this process of becoming posthuman is already far away, because I think if we were more advanced in that stage, we wouldn't see all this kind of screen anxiety, like the Zoom fatigue, like all this ways in which people has experienced the desperation of not having the human contact. So I think the fact that we still need that kind of traditional human contact, the face-to-face contact, that people are craving gatherings in the virtual space, in the mid space, in the physical space, probably tells us that we are still far from being more integrated and more augmented and more merged with some sort of more technological post-human condition.
Yeah, that's interesting. It takes me back to what Aliette said in terms of, first we need to understand what it means to be human. Chen, what do you think? Stan?
I think there are so many angles to tap in this question. First of all, when we speaking of post-human, like the post, it means there's some certain turning point in a linear period of time. So there'll be a historical moment. We get into this kind of transition or transcendent into like posthumanism, like with the technology and with the enhancement of nanotechnology or like consciousness uploading and singularity, etc., etc. So we turn to some kind of post-human, but I think that's so difficult to find a specific time that everyone agreed on that is the point that turned us from human to post-human. So, and secondly, I think like posthumanism as a critical theorist actually is epistemologically is some response to the mainstream like ideology, like male dominant and white supremacy, and also like Western centric discourse. So right now we have posthumanism. Actually, it's developed from feminism and also like queer theory, etc. So I think it's some kind of revolution. So from the marginalized area, right now we try to get into the center of the stage. But what's really triggered me is after pandemic. I couldn't say after because we're still in there, right? So during the pandemic, actually, like especially the climate extreme disaster happened all around the world in recent days. Actually, tapping to the ontologically thinking of post-human, that we are never a species stand alone, but actually we are just a fractal, an element, a small part of this huge Gaia network, because we have microbe in our body, like billions of microbes in our body coexist with us. It's changing our behavior, our diet, our emotion, our maybe our consciousness every other second, but you didn't realize that. So that's, I'll say, the arrogant and the ego of human-centric. So now I think we gotta think beyond that. It's just we have to think broader. We are just a piece of it, and we have to pay the respect to the whole system. So to me, it's sort of like where I try to explore it with my stories to tap into this futuristic. Meanwhile, is back to the tradition Chinese philosophy of like Taoism, which already mentioned all of these things like 1,000 years ago. Like human is just a reflection of the cosmos, and is so deeply connected to all the beings. So all these sentient beings, and also this kind of, we think it's not life, not living stuff like rock or water or something else, but it's all kind of animalism, existence. So to me, it sounds like that. So that's my thought for now.
Thank you. Yes, that's interesting in terms of what was mentioned the first in of the difference between the concept of these, what you mentioned, the egocentric vision of us being enhanced by something, like to us, rather than the true post-human. That's actually more of a, it seems like a better understanding of actually the human as a whole. I think it's interesting that vision. Of course, it has to do in a way, I guess, with geopolitical societies, the cosmovisions. And Renan, what do you think?
So I think post-human is a concept a bit hard to define, because I think it seems like it's always the next step ahead. As if we achieve what we now today call post-human status, then we will think that post-humanity is another thing, is something else. For example, for the people of the 19th century, they might see us as post-human if we travel in time to talk with someone from the 19th century, or even from the beginning of the 20th century. If you ask me right now, what is I don't know, maybe the capital of the Marshall Islands or of any other country, or when Elvis Presley's mother died, I'm able to provide you with an answer in a few seconds because of this extension of memory and information I have, which is the smartphone. And I can tell you how a place looks like, or as Daniela said, I can find myself in any place. And even the fact that we are here now speaking among ourselves in different time zones may indicate that we could be called post-human for our grandfathers or grandmothers. And that's because long-range communication or having access to endless repositories of information and knowledge aren't exactly experiences that our bodies can provide us. It's something, it's kind of an augmentation already. The fact that we have a smartphone or we have all this technology we have today, even if it's external to us, it's not in our bodies yet, but it's external to us. And the fact that I have this, it's a bit of a diversion here, but the fact that I have these things, a smartphone that can help me with many things, and it's could be called an extension of memory or an extension of knowledge. So could it be considered a human right? Because I have an advantage in having that. I can find out if a street is dangerous. If I'm going to a dangerous street, I can find out using the smartphone. And someone who doesn't have a smartphone perhaps can't. So should this be considered a human right? And anyway, we can extend this to other areas like like health and vaccines for the pandemic, for example, so transplants of many organs and limbs that is evolving. I think Leonardo can speak better about this because he's a doctor, and that's what I have to say about.
Thank you, Renan. Yeah, I forgot actually to to introduce myself at first. Thank you for that. Yes, I'm a Chilean physician and science fiction author, just in case. Yeah, I forgot that. Well, thank you, Renan. Well, what I get from what you all said is somehow we all feel like that there is this concept of a better human, or a better concept of human that might be this post-human, that we might be moving forward, we might be in the process, but it seems that it always depends on the point of perspective, right, or the time when we choose to analyze what a human being is at that moment compared to. That's interesting. That's interesting. It somehow reveals that we are not thinking that linearly, as Stanley mentioned as well. So the next question that is related to this, to get it in, let's come back to like more tangible scenarios. Do you think that as we are living right now, the current stage of the world, is this process of post-humanity, or this moving forward, will it be affected by the current inequalities, as Daniela mentioned in a moment, as Stanley mentioned of this Western concept, and all of you somehow mentioned it? Will inequality play a role? Will the concept of the famous billionaires, will they have it first? Will economy play a role in this, or humans will somehow made a way through this situation? Aliette, what do you think about this?
So, well, there's a couple of things that are really interesting in what you ask. I think first off, the idea that there's some kind of like arc of progress, right, which is interesting because in and of itself, that's actually a fairly new thing. It's, I don't know, 18th, 19th century, right? And it's, we could also be going around in cycles.
Yeah, it's like a circle.
Yeah. So, but the second thing I actually wrote down before you asked the question was access, right? Who gets to enjoy the fruit of what advances and under what conditions? And I guess I'm a great pessimist. I don't actually think that, this is. Let me temper that. I think that, the vast majority of human people are decent chaps. Unfortunately, it takes a very small minority of people not being decent chaps to basically ruin it for everyone else, right? So I think that unless there's a conscious effort and a conscious drive and conscious actions that are being taken to actually make sure that access is being evenly and fairly distributed, then this is just going to end up in a very small amount of people with the privileges hogging all the resources, as we have already seen happen over and over, right? This is not actually the first time this kind of thing occurs, and it's a kind of recurrent attractor point of very few people gather a lot of things to them and then don't actually stop.
Do you think it's going to happen again, or do you think that might be different this time?
I feel it very much depends on how we organize. I don't know. COVID has changed a lot of things in that respect, right? Because I think that it's actually made things worse because we are dealing with a scarcity of resources, and it turns out that people do not deal very smartly with scarcity of resources because they just want to, the fact that the Western world is hogging about, I think, is like 10 times the number of vaccines that they would actually have instead of distributing them all across the world, is a kind of prime example of how we cannot, be trusted to do that by ourselves without some kind of organization and impetus. So I think we need to get, I don't know if past the pandemic is the right word, but need to find some kind of accommodation with the pandemic that enables us to actually not be in permanent crisis mode before we can try to come back to what we were doing before and try to make sure that everybody had access to as many things as possible. I certainly feel like there was some impetus to doing that which wasn't present before. But I think we've had a lot of setback because things got harder.
Yeah, I agree. It's not gonna be easy. Like if we could fail again, perhaps that's the thing. If we don't do something. Victor, what do you think about the inequality in all of this?
Actually, I have to take a step back right now. Much like evolution, the movement of societies, the progress of society is actually in fits and starts. It is not a straight line. And there will always be people with more resources and more power than others. But that does not necessarily mean, if you're talking about a big topic like post-humanity or what does it mean to be human, does it necessarily your resources will make you better than somebody else? Because if you think about, say, one of the French kings, Louis XIV, he was richer and he led a more comfortable life than his poor subjects in France at that time. But when I was actually in Paris, one of the guides that was there was telling us that this man, who was the king of France, actually lived a standard of living that was lower than your average 21st century person in terms of healthcare, in terms of food quality, in terms of access to information. He was the most powerful person in that country. And yet, compared to somebody who's just a regular person here, we are better off than he is. So it is actually a little difficult in the big picture to actually say that. Or if you put it in another way, if you look at, say, Avengers, Tony Stark had all the access to all of this. And of course, he built the Iron Man suit. But as Aliette said, not everybody is automatically bad once they have resources. And if you think about it, he's not the only one who had that suit. He actually gave the suit away. And several other people who were there who were not had access to those millions actually had it. So it is actually a very difficult question to say that. But yes, if I were a billionaire right now, I would have a higher standard of healthcare. I would probably have things that other people will not have access to, and that would be better. But will that actually make me post-human? It's a very difficult question to say. If somebody had the power and the resources right now to make the singularity happen, would he do it to himself? No, he would probably get somebody else to do it first and see what will happen. So it is not necessarily true that if I have that power, if I have that resources, I will make myself post-human. I can make somebody else. But yes, they will have access, and yes, there will be inequality. But it does not necessarily mean that that person itself who has it will do it. It's a weird thing, but people are inherently selfish. Besides, in one of the stories I wrote, it was the other way around. He used his money to actually remain human. Everybody else was augmented and became something else, part of a communal society like drones. But he retained his humanity. He was the one who was not post-human. So it really depends. And that's a reality. You will use your power to your relative advantage and your money to your relative advantage at that particular point in time. But does that necessarily mean you will be post-human? I don't think so.
Thank you, Victor. I like how we're already seeing like different point of views about how this might develop. It's very interesting. Daniela, what do you think?
Well, I think, of course, there's this trope in the movies and in science fiction that there's this crazy billionaire who's going to try to be the first one to try the singularity. And if we're thinking about uploading minds or replicating minds inside the virtual space, of course, like in the billionaire is the first one who's going to try to do that. And we have like examples in the real life, like Elon Musk is kind of like really trying hard to live to this standard of the billionaire of the fiction. And I could say that I totally see Elon Musk freezing his brain in order to attain the singularity. If this is not achieved in his lifespan, I think this totally could happen. And we already have companies that are freezing brains, or they're even offering the opportunity of killing you to take your brain right from the start, right fresh, right from you die. You take your brain and they freeze it, and you can wait till it is possible to upload your mind to the cloud. So of course, these kind of services right now that are looking into that kind of singularity are aimed at people who has a lot of resources, and of course people who are going to or who are already looking for immortality, for defeating aging, nanotechnology, to fight all sorts of decay of the human body. It's really likely that this is going to be first available only for people who has a lot of resources. But I think it is like Victor was saying, it's like really natural process in which the technology simply becomes cheaper. It's easier to democratize these things. So I think if we ever see the singularity, we're going to come to some point where you can get this service as a common person. But of course, this raises a topic if we are going to see other sorts of inequality. Because, for example, it's going to be different tiers of cost of uploading your brain. If you don't have a lot of money, will you only be able to afford some sort of low resolution uploading of your brain? Or we can also think on other angles that probably a post-human state would even change our definition of inequality or even abolish inequality. Because if we become a species that only lives on a technological level, on a virtual level, we will no longer be defined by the scarcity of the physical resources. The only resource that is going to be limiting ourselves is going to be like, well, the processing capacity of whatever is making possible the life inside the virtual space. But there are not going to be more inequality situations in terms of food, in terms of money, in terms of water, physical resources that right now define inequality to a really high level. But I do wonder, I mean, it's possible that probably we're not going to see that kind of inequality anymore, but what other kinds of inequality are we going to see? That kind of different levels of resolution, or probably if we get to see some sort of technology that extends life, but by making our thought process much faster in a way that we experience time like slower, and we feel like our lives are really, really, really more longer than they are. Will some people be able to pay for a faster speed of thought? Will some people won't be able to pay for that? Will some people have to go into debt to pay for uploading their minds into the cloud, and maybe they will have to work for a million years of extended time in the cloud to pay for the debt they left behind? I think there are all sorts of possibilities once we got this singularity into the equation.
Well, yeah, the singularity is will it happen while we are alive? Yeah, that's a big thing. Well, thank you, Daniela. Now, before going to Qiufan, just want to add, before asking him about the inequalities, want to add something. Christina here is mentioning, should we only think about posthumanism as something related to technology? We already have mentioned spiritual things and more kind of connection, so I want to add that. And also, Francesco just sent us this, so it's perfect timing for Qiufan to tell us about his stories on augmentation. So what's your take on this inequalities, the Western situation, and everything that comes along?
Yeah, I think we can leave Francesco's question later. So now I think there's a few works pop up in my mind. One is Beggars from Spain, from Nancy Kress. Actually, it's talking about genetic modify. People take over the society. So the key question is whether they have this kind of obligation, responsibility to take care of others, those who did not take it as granted to have this modification. to enhance their intelligence or like physical bodies. So I think that's the question. Like we all learn from history that the level of moral is not increased together with intelligence or with your physical ability, right? So even you enhance yourself, but you didn't become a more gentle, more like graceful people in general. But it also made me to think like Dr. Manhattan in Watchmen by Alan Moore. So
Yeah.
that's another case. It's very typical case that the guy, he was transhuman and he thinks he can see through the limit of time and space continuum, and he know how the world gonna end. So he decides to make the decision for the whole human being. So that's for the greater good of the whole civilization. So that might be another case that some certain like class or elites, group of people who got enhancement, and they really think they can be the king or the god on this planet, and they can make all these decisions. So whether we will call it inequality, so or is another way of better governance. So that's the question, because right now we are facing the same situation here, right? During the pandemic, right? All these different parties, they have different solutions, they have different attitudes. So all of them claim they represent some kind of truth, but the fact is what is the best for the people, for the people's life. So I think this is quite tricky questions. Yeah. There'll be a lot of scenarios there, but I'm pretty looking forward to discuss in the stories and among other stories.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, it's a tricky question because I agree. I mean, like, there are so many possibilities, and when you take different approaches in their idealized way or in their theoretical way, you could say, like, multiple paths might work if you take them as how we think them. But then the tricky part is that how is this going to apply to the human reality? So yeah. Renan, what do you think?
So I think this question boils down to who controls what. Because as we merge with machines, both externally and internally, technology has a great part in it. So the tendency is that we will have a lot of algorithms and routines working inside us. And are these algorithms and routines part of us, or do they have an owner? Because right now we have social networks and smartphone apps, or a lot of things that control our behaviors and map our behaviors and through algorithms. So there are movements that claim that some strategic algorithms, like those who read or map our behaviors, should belong to the community and not to a person or a company with power over it to change it whenever they like it. What I think is that as technology and algorithms become part of nature, because when we are talking about post-humanity, we are talking about a lot of technology becoming part of nature, like the internet is nowadays, basically. Or like take for example the wheel. The wheel is a technological practical invention, just like the algorithm is nowadays, but a long time ago, thousands of years ago. But now it's part of nature, and algorithms were created to be tools to perform a task, but nowadays they are not only that. And so it must be clear who owns them, because a will is a practical object. You know how it works, and it can't take you wherever its manufacturer desires. But an algorithm is something else. Most people don't get to see their gear wheels, their insides, and even those who understand algorithms normally don't have access to them. But they will take you wherever their manufacturer desires. So if it's part of us, if it's part of our bodies, it must be clear who owns them, because like the journalist John Markov, I think his name is John Markov, he said that the best way to answer the hard questions about control in a world full of smart machines is by understanding the values of those who are actually building these systems. So if these things are now part of us, it must be clear who controls them. Because I'm a bit skeptical that we are to be in control of it.
Interesting. Well,
Leonardo,
yes.
If you permit me, I want to very quickly answer Christina's question. In short, no, technology is not the only way you can become post-human, and I have two examples that are very easy to understand. The first one, every single zombie movie or every single zombie book you have, the zombies are actually post-human. They are no longer human as we know it. So most zombie movies, the cause is not technology. It is some virus, or it could be mystical even, whatever it is. But that's one easy example. And the other one is scientists know that learning a new language causes extensive neuroplasticity in your brain. It changes you when your brain physically when you learn a new language. And if you remember in Ted Chiang's seminal work Arrival, that is exactly what happened to the protagonist. She changed. She no longer became human. She evolved beyond her humanity purely by learning the language of this alien species that's there. In both cases are not mediated by technology exactly. They basically happen through other mechanisms. So yes, to answer your question, it is possible to become post-human without talking about technology per se.
The Sapir-Whorf theory, that's the name of
yes,
the
Sapir-Whorf hypothesis.
That's a great one. What comes first? Thinking or language? Well, interesting. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, trying to analyze what we've all mentioned. I think what I feel is that it's clear that our views do have an influence from the places we stand from, like the Latin America perspective, European or Asian perspective, optimism, pessimism, or perhaps reshaping the question, like, is it a thing of an individual, or of the way we govern a collective? So it's a very interesting. I think that, and rounding it up into the thing of the language, I think this all comes to the essence of future con. Like, we need these dialogues. You need to see what the other is thinking. We need to get into the minds in a way to see where do we stand if we have a common ground. So it's very interesting. Now, let me add something different now as we come to this. The third question that I wanted to mention is something related to that I'm sure you know Donna Haraway's work, the Cyborg Manifesto. So the cyborg, it's some people think, or some you can find that some people say that the cyborg is like this first step of or this first notion of the post-human. But the interesting thing that she adds, I would say, and to talk about now, is that she goes beyond the human, the machine, but also involves the animal, the other species, the non-human species. So the question now is, in all of this that we've been talking about, where do you see the non-human species in this equation, the animals, in terms of, could it be in terms of how are we going to live together, or even if we're going to fused into this cyborg concept. What do you think about that part, the animal part, Aliette?
I mean, mostly that. I mean, we were talking prior to this to how human-centered it was, and it's come up multiple times. And I think to some extent, at least in the Western world, this is an attitude that you find has roots in the Renaissance, where the measure of the universe became man as opposed to some kind of, well, either divinity or nature itself, depending on who you ask. And so they've been mostly forgotten from the equation, but we
Yeah.
are learning very fast that one should not mess around with nature. I mean, broadly speaking, other forms of life, right? Whether they're animals or plants, and even the entire ecosystem and planetary system we are a part of. I think that we would need to think about them, but we often don't.
But do you think we will include them now, or is it going to take longer as well? Do you think is it enough where we're dealing now with, like, are we taking them into enough consideration?
I think it depends who you're asking, really, right? And again, I think that's something that's taken a hit with COVID again. Crises do have a habit of like making everything shrink to one's self or communities in the best of cases. But there's been some hopeful developments, and I mean, quite frankly, it's climate change is going to happen to us, so we're not going to have a whole lot of choices, but we're all on this planet together, and nature's going to be fine. But if we don't learn to compose with it, we are not going to be.
Yep, I agree. Victor, what do you think?
I think that the notion that we're either going to augment the non-human creatures is a very Western way of looking at things. Stanley mentioned earlier that there is a lot of fiction about having a Avatar, the movie, is one, for example, that is there, where you have a holistic way of looking at things, where the world is actually part of the organism rather than the human itself. It's not human centric that's there. That's a possible future, actually. And if I look at where I live right now in Singapore really was in dire ecological straits for most of its history. And then sometime around about 30 years ago, people realized that only 10% of the natural world in Singapore, of Singapore's natural resources remained, and people scrambled the other way around, and the country bends over backwards right now. They build highways just for animals to cross across human things. They no longer think of it's man versus nature, or having to augment nature to go along with man, but basically the building planners here want to live in harmony with nature. Now, maybe that's not a very Western concept right now, but it is certainly a valid concept. And it is something that could be our future also. Who knows? Like I said, this is a post-human thing. Very quickly, one of my favorite Twilight Zone episodes, I forget the title right now. A guy was frozen, just like Daniela's example, and when he was woken up in the future, he realizes that there's no technology, or it seems like there's no technology. Everyone basically just does art stuff. They write poetry, they sing, they song, but he finds out later on that it is not true. Every human has become part of the earth, and the chimpanzees are the repositories of information. For example, the plants are the source of light, and basically humans have become part of the world. And then the technology has transferred in a way that is hard to comprehend for somebody who came from, at that time, the 20th century. That could be our future too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I forgot to mention too that when Daniela was saying something about the Elon Musk persona, and I just got me around that. That's like a singular. We don't know where that's gonna go. Interesting terms of multiverses that could go on. Well, thank you, Victor. Daniela, what do you think about the non-human species in all these equations?
Well, I think probably, as everyone was already saying, a lot of our concept of what we imagine post-human is still really human-centered, like humanism.
Yeah.
Like we still think like, well, maybe human is not the measure of all things, but maybe the post-human is the measure of all things. So I think probably the animal world doesn't get that amount of consideration, but probably getting or thinking optimistically, yeah, we could imagine that maybe we could augment ourselves in some way that allows us to live in better harmony with nature, with other species, that maybe even we could be visited by an alien species that could in some way shift the way we've been thinking about ourselves and our relationship to nature. That could perfectly happen, like thinking optimistically, that could be an outcome. But also, if we end up pursuing this idea of becoming post-humanity that has entirely uploaded themselves to some sort of cloud, it's a good question if we could search to, for example, upload our companion animals, because people have strong bonds to their pets, to their companion animals. So I think this is the kind of issue that doesn't get enough thought, but it could arise in some scenario. And I think probably the tricky thing is that as humans, we can consent to undergo any kind of process that we decide is good for us, but the animal doesn't have that same consent. So I think that raises interesting ethical questions. But also, I think it could raise some other of interesting scenarios. Like, for example, if we keep extinguishing a lot of life forms in this planet, like this is a pessimistic scenario, like we don't stop and we keep destroying nature, but will we maybe build some sort of extinct animal museum in the virtual world? Could that, I think that has some sort of there's a sad appeal to that. Or would we try to bring to life species that have gone extinct? Like, will we see some sort of Jurassic Park in the virtual world? I think all of those could be interesting scenarios.
Thank you. Yeah, I personally think that the non-human species play a crucial role in terms of how are we gonna how are we gonna behave as a human species. What do you think, Qiufan?
Yeah, I think recently, I think EU Council had discussed about the rise for robots, or am I wrong? So I think in the future, like AI, digital human, and machines might have their own rise as well. So I remember like Catherine Hales, who wrote How to Become Posthuman. He actually tapped into the field, like she mentioned that there's one type of intelligence might not necessary to have self-consciousness, which means your cell phone, your laptop, your Alexa, your Siri might be some certain level of intelligence agents and entity. So I think once the amount of this kind of entity reach certain number, like considering the neurons in your brain is like 100 billion, so it might be the case. So what could happen? So there might be some emergency from this huge network. And also I collaborate with the GPT-2, so which is algorithm which learn how I write, and we collaborate to write some stuff. And people will ask, who's the author? So how do you guarantee the authority of your work? Because you use a lot of data across internet, and you use some codes from engineers, and you use some algorithm, etc., etc. So how you make sure that this is original work. So I have to put the name of the algorithm together with me as the author. So we're co-authoring together. So I think that's kind of the right we, for now, to guarantee for the machines and algorithm. So that's one thought. And another thought is step into the animal. I think in the future, maybe someday we will have this kind of technology. We can directly communicate with animals. And in that case, we got to know how they perceive the world and how they think of human being. So we might find a lot of interesting things, and we are not exactly the most intelligent species in this planet. So I have this kind of fantasies. There's what would my cat speak to me like? What would he tell me? Right? Don't be stupid. I'm the master. You are the slave. Right? Just pat me and give me some food.
That would be a big plot twist in human history if we get to talk with animals and they happen to be smarter.
Right, it's true.
Yeah, that's interesting. Renan, what do you think? Will we have the plot twist?
When I thought about, sorry.
No, I'm just saying you never know that may happen. I mean, they're difficult in communicating with non-humans.
When I first thought about this question, I thought actually in a human point of view, then proceeding to a non-human point of view. I thought about climate change and how to deal with it from a post-human point of view, with the help of non-human species. Because for example, we could genetically manipulate our bodies to endure more heat or to resist infections, for example. Of course, this would be, it has a bad side because it means we can just destroy the world, and no matter what, we can adapt to it. So it's a bad side of genetically manipulating ourselves to adapt to harsh environments. But in this way, we could increase our chance of survival in a degraded world by climate change or by some other catastrophe. That's interesting when we think about some animals that can cope well with extreme conditions. So in a post-human state, we could mimic their advantages and be some sort of hybrid, adjusting ourselves in very hot weather or freezing weather, and we could have other advantages too, and not necessarily related to survival, or maybe tangentially related to survival, but improving our senses like sight or hearing. And now going to the point of view of non-human species, this kind of evolution of the human, this hybridization, it could do two things to non-human species, in my opinion. It has a bad outcome and a good outcome. The bad would be that we evolved to render the non-human species completely unnecessary. We can adapt it, like I said before, to whatever happens, and then we don't need the ecology to be sustained, our biome to be sustained. That would be a very green outcome. And we think ourselves as superior and every other species as inferior. Like it happens, many people think like that nowadays, unfortunately. And the good outcome would be that we would have more empathy. We would realize how important animal life is and struggle even more to preserve it. And we could even possibly ending extinction because we could recreate in a lab perfectly any non-human species. So there's no way that an animal or a plant will ever go extinct. That could be a good outcome too. That's what I thought about this.
Interesting. So, well, we've been talking for more than 60 minutes now, so we're onto the final ground of this. So I'm gonna like mix a last question for you into one broader, because I want to hear what you think from your own cultural perspective. So integrating the name of the panel again, the posthumous, the after death, posthumous part of it. Um, in all of this, where do you think, and we've mentioned it, where do you think the spirituality, the divine, or something that you feel it's really integrated into your own culture, could be identities of any type? Where do you see that particular aspect, divinity, identity, your own culture, into this scenario? Do you think it will integrate into something broader? Will it remain as it is? Will it reshape itself? Basically, what's your standing point culturally into this next kind of human being existence? I'm gonna go the other way around just to vary. So I'm gonna go back with Renan again. Where do you think, Renan, with all in your case Brazil, for example, where do you think, where's the cultural thing from Brazil in this post-human scenario?
Okay, I'm a bit skeptical about what overcoming death means exactly, but because since up to now, all kinds of augmentation are tied to corporate interest. So it's not an exaggeration to think that we will all be used as commodity. Because if as we said before, if we overcome death, will all of us overcome death, or poor people will keep dying? Or is death maybe going to be a luxury for those tired of life? Or I don't know, maybe someone will want to be immortalized in a non-fungible token, and that would be the kind of the defeat of post-humanity. I don't know. And I think there are multiple ways of spirituality, and some of them might provide us better answers. Because I'm talking from a Western point of view, as a person who don't follow any religion. So I see that with post-humanity, there might be some kind of post-spirituality. Because maybe the closer to the divine that we get, I don't know, maybe the more bored we become. Because I'm remembering a Stargate episode where the population of a planet fled to a virtual world because their world had nothing more to offer in terms of experience. They had overcame matter, so they just need to live in a virtual world where anything was possible. So I think if we as a species arrive to this moment one day, maybe our sense of religion and belief might evolve drastically. Yeah. And maybe paradise will become just a place we could project, or maybe God is just a role we can achieve through advanced technology.
That's a good quote. Maybe God's just a role we can achieve. Intense. Where do you think in your case, China or the Chinese culture, the divine in all of this?
I think in China we have very long history of spiritualism. Even now we are a touristic country, but back in the days, like 1,000 or 100 years ago, there's so many Taoism practitioner, so their whole life goal purpose is to get through this practice to become uh, immortal divine in a way. So even some emperor back in the history, they are really trying so hard to get the longevity with taking so much drugs, which provide by some Taoist. Ironically, they end up died out of heavy metal intoxication mostly. So that's very ironic. And I think one book I highly recommend is Nova Scene. Nova Scene by James Lovelock, who is the scientist who invented the term Gaia. So this is the latest book published in 2019. So as he wrote in the book, like Anthropocene is gonna end, and what's coming next actually is all dominant by silicon-based species. Not even he called it cyborg, but actually it's not the cyborg from Donna Haraway, but it's pure silicon machine form like life. So he thinks like we are just past buyers, and why we emerge because the purpose of the cosmos is to generate consciousness on certain level. So that's why we exist, but we just a byproduct. So ultimately, there will be some more intelligence and more capable to adapt to any environment, like the silicon cyborg will take over the planet. And he really think this is the future. And I think that's also tap into the spiritual thought. That's because if you consider all the existent beings, including the universe itself, is mathematical. So everything is from information, actually. So actually, it's just the way how, like Elon Musk, claimed that the world is simulation and in the matrix as well. So I think definitely like the ultimate goal of posthuman is actually become some kind of normalization information stream, and you can directly emerge with the whole universe. You're part of it. So that's also very Taoism and also very Buddhism. So I think that's very connected to our culture and also to our traditions. I've been visiting a lot of minority shamans since last year. So I joined their rituals. I talk to them. I try to understand why they still keep practicing this ritual even in modern society. And now I understand because this is the way how they maintain the balance between human being with the nature. So I think that's totally makes sense. Even now, I think it's more relevant for us to reach back in time. So we got to learn from them, from indigenous people, from shamans, from ancient wisdoms. So because there's something there beyond the dualism of Western philosophical thinking. It's like a framework right now, it's trapping everyone. So we can only see very limited choices ahead of us, but actually we have to thinking out of the box, even without the box. So, so that's I think how we gonna solve all these problems in a global perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I love the mentioning of we might need to think even without the box. I like that one. Here, Rodrigo Bastidas mentioned the cyber shamanism. Chilean science fiction does that too. He knows. Well, Daniela, what do you think about Mexican culture in this case and the divinity and the post-human?
Well, The Mexican religion, the dominant religious tradition is in Mexico is, of course, the Catholicism, the Christianity. And I would say that a very death-centered Christianity, like Mexicans are really all about this suffering, this image of the suffering Christ in the churches. So, and I think that a lot of the core of the Catholicism is in death, suffering, and guilt. So I think it's really interesting to think about some version of posthumanity that could probably better our lives, that could probably enlarge our lives, that could probably reduce the amount of suffering in the human experience. And I can say that I could totally see like the Mexican Catholic Church opposing this kind of enhancements, saying that this goes against God, that this challenges the idea that you must suffer on earth and then find the redemption and the salvation in the afterlife. And of course, opposing any kind of immortality. So I think some sort of a spiritual conflict might arise in those terms. But also, of course, we are globally, not just in Mexico, but globally, and Mexico too, advancing to a more rationalistic, more atheistic society that, of course, a lot of people could simply reject those views. Like, that doesn't align with me. I don't care. I'm going to either way pursue immortality because I couldn't care less for the Christian version of immortality. But also, there's another way of seeing that because you could say that posthumanism could uh, create the spiritual realities that the religion can only imagine, that they cannot be sure that they could grant you. Uh, and also, there are other views because, as Qiufan was saying, I think some concept of some version of post-humanity can resonate hard, a lot harder with Eastern versions of spirituality that kind of aim at the idea of a world in which everything is conscious and expanding the consciousness and being in a more a state of unity with all sorts of beings in the universe. So I also think that posthumanity could lead us there, and probably this doesn't align as much with more earthly, more less complex or more popular experiences of Christianity. But there's also a tradition of mysticism in Christianity, and there are people such as Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who was Christian and who actually had all these theories about turning more matter into mind, and that the purpose of every life form is to become more conscious and expand the amount of consciousness that we see in the universe. So I do think that posthumanists could also lead us there to reach those sort of more enlightened experiences of life, of the human life and of the universe.
Yeah. Victor, what's your take on it?
Before I answer that question, let me quickly just say a comment that I wanted over the previous topic.
Oh, okay,
If you look at Star Trek, dolphins, whales, and cetaceans are canonically members of the crew of Galaxy class starships. So that's one example where non-humans have been integrated. The other thing is, if you've ever read Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, then mice, dolphins, and whales are all smarter than humans. And they tried to help humans get out of the planet when it was bulldozed, but we didn't listen. So, oh well, too bad for us.
It's a non-human species plot twist of human history.
Yeah, that was the plot twist right there.
Yes.
Okay, now I'm going to answer your question two ways. Firstly, I live in Singapore, but I am Filipino. So I'm always torn between two cultures that are here, and my two. I've written about the post-human condition from the perspective of two cultures that are here. Both stories are actually available in this. I don't know if you can see it. This is Lontar. This is a 10 volumes of the Journal of Southeast Asian Speculative Fiction. So Lontar includes stories by Aliette, by the way. Includes a story by Aliette, I believe. And essentially, this is a magazine that sadly has ended, but it contains stories from people who are all over Southeast Asia. And in the story that I have from Singapore, essentially a very high tech society, everyone has turned into a mathematical equation. They are living mathematical equations. So that is actually reflective of how Singapore likes to algorithmize everything that is over here. In my Filipino story here, when Facebook came to the Philippines, it very quickly went into the top 5 users that are here because Filipinos are very sociable and we like to talk. And in the post-human future that I can envision for the Philippines, everybody's just basically one unimind. Everybody's integrated. So yes, it is high tech, but actually the reason is because we are comfortable. We finish each other's sentences. We are a society that is very Asian in that way, but it's particularly Filipino in that we have no boundaries with each other.
Mhm.
And that has become part of the post-human experience that I wrote about in another story, again in Lontar. But to answer your particular question on spirituality, unfortunately, I am not very religious, but I do have a sense of spirituality. And I believe that there's one thing that is moot about our topic right now. The very, for me personally, and this is just personal, it may not hold for everybody else in the panel. The very definition of humanity for me is death. We are defined by death. And even if somehow or the other we are able to upload our consciousness, we are able to defeat death as we know it right now, that is never going to happen because the universe itself is finite. Even if we somehow exist, we will never exist forever. It will end at
Yeah.
some point. And that, to me, is the reason why the goalposts of post-humanity will keep shifting, but I don't think we'll ever escape being human because our humanity is defined by the fact that we will die. And when we die, that actually creates our humanity, creates the essence of our being. But that's a personal view. That's not necessarily
Yeah,
yeah.
it's interesting. It goes into the concept of what's eternal, right? Into the
Yeah.
eternity itself, like, instead of what's infinite. But yeah, it's interesting. Just wanted to say a little bit. I think Latin Americans share a lot with Filipino culture. Just to mention that, as you were mentioning the cultural background there. Aliette, what do you think for this last question?
Well, I think personally, I would tend to agree with Victor, and I think that if we are talking, I mean, to me, part of spirituality is engaging with life, but especially engaging with death and what comes or doesn't come beyond death, right? And as Victor says, I don't think that's something that we're going to lose, even if we do become post-human. The fact that things are finite is, I think, going to stay with us, and that it's a bit, the fact that we now have the internet and virtual spaces has not ended spirituality or religion. So I think these are ways of looking at things and ways of thinking that are going to shift, because, I mean, there's a perception that religions aren't changing, but that's totally false, right? The Catholic Church of 2000 years ago is most definitely not what it was. It's not the current Catholic Church. Things move and change because that's also, I think, part of who we are. And I think that the religions and the spiritual are just going to come with us in new forms.
Interesting. Well,
thank you. We're reaching the end of this, but thank you very much. I think it's amazing that have all the different views that we share here. I think it's a very interesting thing. We could be talking about this, I think, for many more hours perhaps. But well, the time has come, and I want to thank all of you for being here, for sharing your opinions, your point of views. This is not an easy topic. We don't have all the answers, but it's something interesting to discuss. That's the idea of FutureCon again. And so thank you very much. Some people were asking for all the recommendations that you've made. If we're gonna save them somewhere, we're gonna try to do that. But just if you have any time, you yourself can write them in the comments of the YouTube section, for example, just if you want.
Sure.
But once again, thank you, and I hope that you keep watching all the panels of FutureCon. I'm gonna invite you and the audience to watch the next one. That's gonna be at, well, I know the Chilean time. You better check the schedule so you don't get confused with the time zones. But yeah, they're saying about the comments that you can put in YouTube. So keep watching FutureCon. Let's see what else is gonna be around, and thank you very much. So take care. We'll be seeing you again somewhere else or another panel perhaps. So take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye. Ciao.
Ciao, ciao.
William Gibson once said, "The future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed." The time has come to draw attention to science fiction stories written all over the planet. Stories made of different languages, colors, shapes, hopes, and beliefs. The future happens everywhere. That's why we are here.